everybody's had enough time to join. Those that haven't will get the recording, and obviously, as I said, I'll send it out to everybody. Today's session that we're doing is looking at the main SQL security products from Idera in regards to auditing and permissions. The two tools that we're going to cover are SQL Compliance Manager and SQL Secure. The mainstay of this is going to be Compliance Manager, because you will see that Secure is a great tool, but it's more of a sort of bolt-on added value kind of thing, rather than a sort of full-on security product. To give you a little bit of background, how we're going to run the session is, those that have you been to the Diagnostic Manager sessions is going to be exactly the same way. I'm going to talk about how we do this from a sales perspective. Stephen is going to show you an overview of the product on sort of a short live demo, but also we've got some slides that we will send out to you as well in regards to sort of headline information about the products themselves. So Compliance Manager is our SQL auditing tool. So over the last few years, everybody has seen a massive increase in the requests from government and business sort of departments on regards to managing and maintaining the security of data. This has come to the fore when about 7 or 8 years ago we had Ernst & Young come to Idera and ask us, do we have a product that would allow them, as obviously one of the largest auditing firms out there, to allow their customers to comply with regulatory standards for auditing their SQL databases. So Ernst & Young and Idera sat down and sort of worked out what the things were that people would need to see from an auditing product, how they could go about getting that information, and obviously the best way to provide a tool that allowed them to do it. So Compliance Manager was born. It's, again, very much a product that has been designed specifically with the SQL market in mind in regards to what we're actually trying to achieve. A heads up is there may be expansions on this in the next year or so, and we will see what sort of things are covered then. But what I'll do is leave Stephen to now sort of go through the high level sort of things that Compliance Manager is offering the customer. Stephen, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Okay, so basically, as Bob alluded to, there are two sides to the security suite. There's the who did what, where, when, etc., and what they're actually doing. And the other side is who's got the permissions to do that and how do they get those permissions. So one is looking backwards and one is looking forwards. So Compliance Manager is the one we're going to start with and is the one we're majoring on today, which is basically showing you who did what and how they did it. Now, typically, in the past, if you wanted to audit this sort of level of information, you had to switch on C2 security levels in the SQL Server and buy twice as much hardware to run it. Now, it's great for the American military, but not much good for most else. So, as Bob talked about, we were asked by one of the auditing companies, in fact, one of our large companies as well, to develop the Compliance Manager, which allows you to focus in very accurately onto those areas of your data which are actually containing the sensitive data, that allows you to actually see who's maybe even looked at the data, but who's made the updates, what the values were before and after they made the updates, any inserts that have happened, any changes to the database structures, any new logons, security violations, all that sort of area. Really designed so that people can let their auditors, the internal auditors, be self-serving. If you're running internal audits or subject to internal audits, the amount of work that actually gets passed on to the team, the IT team, to actually provide the information is quite dramatic. I've had a number of clients who've actually spent 2 or 3 months actually collecting together this sort of information. And the whole principle behind Compliance Manager is to allow the internal auditors, the auditors, to actually self-service the reports themselves with minimal input and interference, well, input probably, from the IT team. Architecturally, it's quite simple. It's typical of an Idera product. We have the central console here where we're actually initiating all the monitoring from, and it's reaching out to the instances that we're monitoring. Unlike our normal day-to-day diagnostic managers, we actually have an agent installed on these machines, and that's basically so that if people start to do things like take network cables out, we can carry on the monitoring in the background. The one thing to be aware of is that the database repository that's being used to host the Compliance Manager itself needs to be of at least the same version as, or the highest version of any of the ones you're monitoring. So if you're monitoring a 2012 system, it must be 2012 or 2014. 2016 is coming on later on this year. So just giving you a flavor for what's going on. There are several moving parts. Basically, up in the center, which is a secure, immutable database so that you can prove to your auditors that the data has not been changed since it was recorded. It'll actually initiate the request for information, as you'll see. It's passed down. That information is then collected in a compressed, secure form, passed up to the middle, and then made available in the database for reporting against. So at this end, the technology needs to have permission to collect the information and to temporarily store it. And then in the center, the technology needs to have permission to collect the information and then write it to it. So the biggest issues we find with Compliance Manager, people installing it, is just making sure that all the permissions are correct. Once that's set up, it's very simple to use. Typically, you see a monitoring load of less than 5%. It really depends exactly on what it is you're selecting to monitor, but I'll show you some of that as we go forwards. This is, I guess, somewhat towards Bob's area, but basically what we're aiming for here is to let you know the type of people who will be interested in it. Normally, what we're talking with most of the Idera tools is looking at the technical team who will be using it. The Compliance Manager and the security tools are typically picked up on a different range of staff. So it's people like this compliance team, the security team, the IT managers, rather than the day-to-day DBA users. They have to install it, they have to make it work, but the people who are using it, who are recommending it and who are making the purchases, tend to come from a different area of the company. So you can see the qualifying questions there. Thanks. Bob, do you want to disperse this point?
I do indeed. So, I mean, there are basic questions there. What we've found especially over the last 3 or 4 years, is you have countries, the governments are sitting there saying, you know, because data security is such a big issue, we need to put out some guidelines. Now, these may not be sort of regulatory standards that people have to achieve, like things like SOX, Basel II and PCI that are on the list, because they're for specific regions. But you do have things like the Poppy Act in South Africa. In the UK, we have a thing called GPG 13, which is to do with all government departments and the levels of auditing that they have to deal with government departments, and various other ones. We've seen quite a few across the globe, and I would suspect that each of your own countries are now having more and more sort of regulatory standards pushed onto you in regards to how data and everything is managed. This has caused obviously problems for the database teams, because it may be something they've done ad hoc before as a requirement, but are now more and more being pushed towards this being a yearly sort of task that has to be completed. So we've looked at all of this, and spoken to companies in quite specific ways to find out what they're doing, how they're doing it, and where we can then assist them. So Stephen's got a couple of things to say here, so I'll just pass on to him for a second.
Yeah, I mean, as Bob was saying that, yes, you have these annual or biannual or even semi-annual requests for the information, but what they're starting to put more and more focus on is actually the ability to continuously monitor, so that although they may be querying the data on those sort of timeframes, they want to be able to look at any time going backwards in the past. So if you were talking about financial institutions, this could be over several years. So the ability to collect this information in a concise format and store it and archive it is kind of key, but also to allow you to report over those extended time periods is important. Sorry, Bob, you were saying.
No, that's fine, Stephen. So you've got some qualifying questions there, very basic. It's very much more along the lines when you'll be speaking to people that we need that bit more in-depth details. Obviously, there's basic stuff there, but the first couple of questions are very relevant. Are you governed by any compliance regulations? Do you have internal and external audits going on? If they are then replying, well, yeah, we do, everybody does, that sort of thing, we need to get to the sort of grit and bones of what that means for them. So we very much gear the questioning to how long does it take them to gather all the information? Is it recorded? How do they archive the information to make sure they've got it? One of the stipulations in the UK that some companies have is that they have to retain the auditing data for up to 5 years. Now, if you haven't got a proper archiving system to do that, that can be problematic. One of the biggest benefits within Compliance Manager is it will auto archive things for you. All you need is a place to actually put it. So we gear things to how they're currently doing it, how much of an issue it is to get the data, whether they have issues in regards to covering all the data that is required, i.e. Obviously one of the big things with Compliance Manager is the before and after data, and who has actually done what, when, where, how, why. Well, the why generally comes afterwards when you find out somebody's been messing around with your data, and then you can catch them and beat them up. But the whole, and it is very much a rigmarole about trying to attack your SQL databases to find out specific information from somebody else's requirements, i.e. not your own requirements, can be a real issue. The idea of Compliance Manager is that it allows that to happen by you just predefining the information that you need, and then Compliance Manager getting that for you. So again, it's all about how they're doing it now. What are the implications to them, either from the point of the security guys or auditing guys that have to provide the information for them work-wise, but also the cost to the company for not complying with any of the auditory regulations or standards that they have to achieve within their industry or within their company. Because generally, what we have found is that if a company has to adhere to any form of audit, there is a monetary penalty for not doing so. And those can be quite drastic costs. It's one of the big selling points, mainly because Diagnostic Manager per instance will cost X amount. That tends to be far, far less than they would actually be fined by the government or the actual regulatory standards. But I think one of the first things we need to do is probably go into the tool now, let Stephen show you around so you can see what people are actually getting from buying Compliance Manager, and then we can talk about more salesy stuff afterwards.
Okay, great. Okay, so hopefully you can now see my screen. I've updated it to show you looking at Compliance Manager for real, and this is loading on my laptop at the moment, so it's real data, real system, but not particularly high power, but just to show you the effect. So what we can see here is looking at a particular system. Now, a couple of things to note here. If I were to go to look at this instance for real, we'd find there are hundreds of data, well, tens more databases underneath here. One of the key things in compliance and for capturing of data is to allow you to be selective about that information that you want to collect. It's comparatively easy, as I mentioned previously, to switch on C2 auditing or the later versions of it and just get a tsunami wave of data coming towards you, which you then have to both process, store, and then try to analyze later. What we're doing in Compliance Manager is to allow you to focus in on those areas of your systems that actually contain sensitive data or data that you want to record. So if we look here, I'm collecting data potentially from a subset of the databases within my system. And what we're actually seeing then across here is the type of information we're collecting. Now, I can look at the data both at an instance level or at an individual database, and we'll look at both of those. What we're actually then seeing is at a simple level, things like failed logons for my instance, and it's going to then update and actually show me the number of failed logons over a period of time, so I can look at focusing on particular periods of time if I want to. But this is just giving me a high-level flag, so as a DBA or as a security guy, I can see, are we starting to get problems in my systems and I need to work on areas. But then you can actually start to look at types of alerts happening within it. So if you've got, for example, sensitive columns, if someone even looks at that piece of data, you want to know about it. That's what we call a data alert. That's just a subset of the concept of a formalized event. Now, what I'm looking here is a list of events. Now, how many events? How big is an event? How much data does it take to store? Typically, by the way we say it, we find it takes about 1 gigabyte to store 1 million events, each one of these things being an event. How long does it take to get 1 million events? It depends on your system. I've got clients who produce millions of events an hour. I've also got other clients where it can take 6 months to produce 1 million events. So it really depends on the complexity of your system. But what we are doing here when we're actually looking at the data is giving filter controls up here to be able to analyze directly into it. So this is me just exploring through what's happened in my system, and I've said, okay, I want to look at today, but I can look over a longer period of time or a custom date range. I've also said I want to look at a particular logon. So one of my users, Katya, happens to be my daughter's name, but and I'm just investigating what she has done today. So within this high level, I can see that she's done some DML activities, some logons. There's been a logon failure, and I'll click on that, see what's going on here. Well, I can see that Katya logged on, and basically she didn't type in the right password to start with. Now, we can show you later how you set up what it is you want to monitor, but that gives you a straight fact. We can see that she's done some DML activities, so an update statement. We can see when the update occurred. We can see which database it came to, which object she was hitting. If we follow through on that, I've actually chosen for this particular data to be able to record the before and the after value, so I can actually see what was going on. I'll just double click on that particular one. We can then see details about the event, so we can see the update statement that she actually issued. And you can see here that she actually just told her to go up to 1,500 or 150,000 rather for this system. Now, if I was not choosing to record the before and after, that's what I would actually see. And of course, we wouldn't know necessarily what it had been previously. So you get the option of selecting I want to know what it was before and after, and that's where this data comes from, or we see it up here as well. Other sort of information we're collecting. Which application did you come from? When did this happen? What sort of update? But this application is quite key, because you might be perfectly happy for someone to log on or do an update if they come through your secure application. But if they come in via SQL Server Studio, Management Studio, you want to know about it. So that sort of granularity of control. If we just come through to the details section here as well, a lot of this is relatively technical. Again, it shows you the application. But if you remember, we were talking about the immutable database, being able to prove to your auditors that the data hasn't been changed. Every time we actually write a record to our repository, we write hash values against it, so we actually know if anybody's changed the values on the record, so that we can prove to the auditors that the information has not been changed since we wrote the record out. And we also chain the records together so that if someone just deletes the record completely, we'll also know that, so that we can prove to the auditors that it hasn't been modified. So you can see the type of range of things here we're picking up on. And of course there are audited reports as well. So these are the type of things that you might well let your auditing team or your external or internal auditors work with. And you can see the reports down the right hand side. This is probably one of the most generically used ones where they're actually saying, I want to run a report against. Now this is kind of interesting. I'm saying I'm going to run it against my main database, but Bob touched on the archiving and the auto-archiving data. These are ones that I've currently still got online, but the archives from previous quarters. I've got my data archiving at a quarterly basis. So if I wanted to run the same queries I'm looking at now, but looking at historical data, I can select which period I want to look at. So I'm going to look at my system. I'm going to look at perhaps changes. We know that Katia was making changes to the Northwind database. Let's have a look at that. Let's pick a period of time. So maybe I'm going to run the last couple of weeks maybe. And I'm going to show perhaps the SQL. As you can see, we can have a look at down here. So if I wanted to see what logons or failure logons, we can look at categories of things, or we look at the DML. So we can see what changes have been made. So this is the type of thing that would want to be asked for by your internal auditors who are coming through. That could take a long time. If you actually didn't have a tool like ComplianceManager to help you, you'd have to go get the original data, get the transaction logs, run through the transaction logs to find where this has been coming from. So we can see here that we've had salary information update. Katia did an update, came from SQL Server Studio. This time, this is the SQL that she actually issued. And we can see here that Zoe, who's my other daughter, by the way, yesterday made a couple of days ago actually made a modification and set the salary to 140,000. So you can see that actually these two have been battling it out over the last month or so, updating the salary in both ways. But this is the type of information that your auditors want, and it can be exported out directly from here to PDF and Excel. Additionally, you can actually deploy these reports out to Microsoft reporting services. So you can, again, potentially remove your auditors from actually having to log into this tool at all, and you just give them access to the reports via reporting services. And you can see there's a number of other reports going through the tool. So the question then comes, how do we get that? How do we set the levels of monitoring? You see the kind of deliverables we're getting out of it. And if you come to an instance or a database, there's two levels of monitoring. This is how you set what it is you want to monitor. So looking here at the instance itself, we're saying, do I want to record every time anybody logs on? Probably not, but I'm going to record failed logons. I'm going to record DDL activity, social security activity, DDL activities, etc. And you can choose what level of information you want to record. So perhaps I'm only going to record actions that have actually passed, or maybe only actions that failed, or I'm interested in all of them. I can choose the filtering levels. By the way, you can actually have different levels of auditing from different peoples. So you've got a group which you might call the privileged users. These are people who might have access to SQL Server Studio. Most of your users might not. So for example, Katia is in that group. And for those users, you might choose to record a different range of activities. So for example, I've actually chosen to record the logons for my privileged users, but not for my normal background users who are the day-to-day users of the system. So we can know when Katia, who is a super user, has logged on at all, and also when she failed on, which we saw previously. But you can see here the logons have failed, logons being recorded through here. And again, you can choose different range of activities for what you want to record for her. Similarly, if we go to the database itself and say we want to look at the auditing happening here. So again, but same sort of level, same range of sort of stuff, but now looking at a database level, so database definition, so create and drop tables, etc., DML activities. You could actually want to record any select activity that's happened. Now, on a normal system, that's likely to generate a vast amount of data, but you may well find you've got some crown jewel table that only very, very few people need to access at all, and then you might choose to just audit that particular object, but in general you probably wouldn't. You can choose to whether you want to capture the SQL statements or not bother, and then you see the other ones down here. And then stepping across, which objects do we want to record? We're looking at a database, but we don't need to record everything in that database. We could select all of the activities. Or we can say, no, these are certain objects that I need to record data for. Maybe all user tables, or just a certain subset. So here I've actually said I want to record information for 2 of my tables, the employees and salary information table. And I've said I want to record any potential activities happening in the system tables as well. Now remember I said about maybe wanting to record for some sensitive columns, sensitive information, both before and the after of data. So not just the fact that its salary is now this, but what it was previously. Now, as I said, you could just record that at a high level, but this is much more sensitive. This allows you to say, this object and potentially a particular column within that object, if anybody makes an update to it, then I want to know the before and after values of it. Similarly, instead of having the broad brush select activity, with sensitive columns, you can actually say, if someone looks at this specific column of data, I want to know about it. But if they look at other columns in the same table, that's not a problem. So for example, in the employees table, you've probably got first name and last name. Well, that's not a problem. But there's a social security number, or as we would say in the UK, a national insurance number. If someone even looks at that number in a select activity or select star, then I want to know about it. Similar for orders, looking at the credit card numbers, or maybe the salary column within the salary information table. Other columns, not a problem. Those columns, I want to know about it. And again, we've got the privileged user, where we can actually change and have different range of permissions for the privileged user. The one I just slightly skipped over here, trusted user. This is slightly counterintuitive, but quite frequently you find that people have got applications that most of their users come in through, and those applications will use a single account to access the SQL Server. If those activities being done by that application are self-auditing, or you treat them as being secure, then you might say, okay, anything that's done by that service account, I don't need to record. And that's the idea of the trusted service account here. Slightly counterintuitive, but really what we're trying to do here is to minimize the collection of data, just to make sure that you actually have control to collect the information that's actually important for your compliance needs. So that's how we set up the monitoring, and by the by, you can set up the monitoring characteristics in advance in an XML file and just load them in. So if, for example, in your region, maybe the poppy region, South Africa for poppy, but other regions, you've got your own regulations, you can set that up in an XML file and just load it in, and it'll just predefine those information for you. So you can value add onto your client base as well by offering that if you so wish. So we've seen some of the audited activities. The last area really to talk about is administration, and that's not just what it obviously appears to be, so users and which servers and things, but also the idea of setting up alerts and filters. Now, alerts, basically what we're saying there is something happens to the data, you want to be notified about it via emails, or writing out to the Windows event log, or sending an SNMP trap, that sort of stuff. And just an example, for example, I have a client out in Australia, and he was driving home one day and he got an email alert on his phone telling him that someone was looking at their client tables in their customer CRM system. So, this is 7 o'clock at night, nobody should be doing that. So he kind of turned around, drove back to the office, came into it, came up behind, and there was a salesperson who was planning on leaving, and he was sitting there downloading their entire client database to a thumb drive. Because he'd actually set up a monitor, so if anybody looked at sensitive data, he knew about it and could be alerted on it. He actually came up, put his hand on his shoulder and said, what the heck do you think you're doing? So real-time sort of stuff, but just to show you how you do that very easily. So here one, for example, I want to know if someone has been granted the sysadmin role on my system. So clicking on here, I could create new events, by the way, by just picking on one that already exists. So what sort of event are we interested in? So in this case, I'm interested in a specific event where someone is adding a particular role to a logon. So you can see the type of thing I'm doing down here. I'm creating a high-level alert when someone adds a logon role on this particular instance, though I don't need to be specific on the instance, and I'm saying someone's giving the sysadmin role. And then what do I want to do? Well, I'm going to raise an alert message, and I'm going to write it to Windows event log and send an SNMP trap. So I'm not, in this case, sending an email. But if we just step through, we can see what we're doing here. So I could say, I am interested in a particular server. If I take that off, as you can see down here, it's any SQL server. I don't need to specify particular servers that I want to monitor. If I don't, it'll be applied to them all. So it's giving the granular filters to be done. Same for databases and maybe host names. Stepping forward, maybe I only want this filter to apply to connections coming from a specific application or a specific logon name and things. So you have all those sort of controls so you can make sure these alerts are meaningful and tuned to what you want to do. This is what I said, I could pick up an email notification. If I tick that, by the way, it just brings it up and then I can specify the details of who's to get the alert in this context. In fact, if I just click on the alert message here, you can see this is the message that will be sent. And you've got free text fields, you've got the guys with the dollars in front of them, they come from here, they will be populated, these are variables that will be populated by the alert. So you can make your email messages, your SMTP messages, and even Windows event log messages meaningful with tuned data from the alert itself, from the event, so that it's a meaningful one. So that's just what we're talking about there. Okay, the other side, by the way, is filters. So we touched on what I think of them as macro level filters and micro level. The macro level are passed down to the instance that we're monitoring, and they are just at a broad sweep saying, I want to see who looked at this object. I want to see this sort of stuff. And we're just talking block level. Tell me about this sort of stuff. That data then gets passed up to the center, and then you can put micro level filtering within that, and that's what we're talking about here, event filters. So this gives you the ability to be more selective about what sort of data you're actually storing and maybe working with. So here, for example, is an example of a filter I created. And basically what I was trying to do here was to replicate the trusted service account functionality we saw when we were doing the macro level stuff, but giving us some more tweaks of control to it. So what I've said here is I want to filter on any DML activity that's happened on any server when they're hitting the Northwind database. And I want to know if the application that they're coming in from is our application, and it's coming in using the service account, then I'm going to filter that record out. So it won't be written to our repository. So I'm happy with that. If, however, it comes in using the service account, so the same service account but on any other application, so if somebody happens to find or work out the trusted service account password and could log in using SQL Server Studio, that wouldn't be coming from our application. So therefore, we wouldn't filter it out and we would record it. So in that case, you could be this selective about, I'm only going to remove activity from our trusted service account only if it's being used from our application. Anybody else, we'll record it and we can track on it. So again, dead easy to do. Select the objects you're interested in. I'm just interested in the Northwind database, so that's what I've specified. Logon names, I've actually said, well, I'm interested in these two, logon name being our application and being the service account, and the application name being our application. So you can see exactly the same sort of functionality we saw before, gave the name, etc. So a lot of controls within that space to work with. And you can see the other controls up here. Bob, you're around?
I am indeed. Riveted by your demonstration, Stephen.
As ever, as ever.
So, I mean, you can see the tool has real depth in what it can provide the customers in regards to what information they need to hold for auditors, and even if they're not using it for auditing and are using it for their own internal requirements to ensure that nobody's messing around with their data, the breadth of information that they can maintain is fantastic. So we're looking at, realistically, the way we're putting things across now, data compliance is a must rather than a nice to have. As we mentioned earlier, sort of the growing number of regulatory standards that people are bringing out, and everybody knows about Sarbanes-Oxley, PCI, The Americans have some fantastic ones with HIPAA and FERPA and things like that. But these are spreading out more and more. You have ISO 27001. These are things that companies are aspiring to in regards to their document and data management, because it says that we have control of what's happening with our information, especially if they're dealing with customer data and things like this. It's really important that this sort of thing doesn't get out into the marketplace. The main issues around external and more frequently internal hackers taking information from companies. That, if somebody is hacking, that leads to downtime because the system has to be updated. If you're immediately informed if anyone's making changes to your data the moment they break in and start playing with it, you can do something about it there and then. But if it's something you find out about a week later, you've got issues. There are issues around lost business revenues, bad publicity. Look at the amount of companies that have had massive issues with their publicity. I mean, we had Sony with the PlayStation 4 credit card details that something like, I don't know, it was sort of $250,000 credit card details for people that paid their online gaming fees online were all taken from Sony's website. Those sort of bits of information, strangely enough, are going to be stored in SQL databases or database, that type of database, not necessarily SQL. They could be using Oracle, things like that. But if that data gets out there, the company, they're going to get fined. There's going to be real severe implications on the brand itself and people's faith in that company to maintain security of their data. So what we also need to be looking at when we're talking to these people, again, we kind of covered the fact that you're going to be talking to IT auditors, DBA managers, and sort of people that are involved in data security and data management, because it's more than just a DBA's role to ensure that this stuff is up and running and working. So we need to kind of steer the questioning that we're doing in regards to who that person is. So if you are talking to the auditors themselves, it's about how are they reporting on auditing requirements at the moment? How do they get their auditing documentation? How do they disseminate that around the organization and to the external auditors, which is obviously all covered by the reporting side of things, RSS feeds, etc. Then you're looking at how they do their auditing. What does it take for them to get the information without using a tool like ComplianceManager to do it for them? So, what is the cost for you time-wise? How many people have to do this? What sort of man-hours is it taking you to produce this information? How often do you need to do it a year? How do you store the information? And we are once I've just finished my spiel, we are going back to talk to Stephen about things like backups as well. How do you alert on the information to ensure that nobody's making changes? Because it's all well and good having the audit trail there, the information for the auditors, and then find out that because you actually didn't have any alerting on what's happening with the data, that between two audits you've had 500,000 customer records stolen or changed by some nefarious person either in your company or outside it, and again, makes the company look bad because they've got something that's happened and they knew nothing about it. If you're talking to the DBA manager side of things, it's about the integrity of the data and the storage of the data. Again, we're going to talk about backups again in a moment. The database security itself, who does have access to it? How can they make changes? Where would those changes be made from? All of this is the sort of thing that you can cover with ComplianceManager, and you need to find out how they're doing that without ComplianceManager. And one of the biggest things, if they are dealing with customer data, there is 100% going to be service level agreements in place in how they manage that data. How do they maintain the performance of their SLAs in regards to security of that information without a tool that can assist them in monitoring that information? You can go all the way up the line. We do have quite a lot of conversations that go further with larger organizations where you'll be talking to VPs in regards to IC security, the head of IT security. We're talking board level interaction. Their biggest pain points are going to be talking about things like the entire IT risk strategy for the company. How will Compliance Manager assist within that risk strategy? What are they doing in regards to it at the moment, and how is that going to assist them, or how will Compliance Manager assist them moving forward to maintain their risk strategy? What are their management protocols for threats, both internal and external, in management of their databases? How are they controlling it? Where is it controlled? What sort of management is there to them to allow that control to happen? And obviously, for any company, their biggest asset is their data. So this whole compliance and security side of our SQL business is geared towards protecting the core assets of the business. And for want of anything else, everybody in business will say, well, the most important thing is the information we have on our customers, and obviously maintaining the security of that is imperative to the brand and the company. But let's jump back onto Stephen and look at the whole backup side of things and how that works with Compliance Manager.
Okay, thank you. Like the whole thing, it's not going to take too long, by the way. It's basically just showing you the automatic archiving, which we talked about previously, just to show you how easy it is to configure it. So basically what I've got configured here may not be realistic for your situation, the figures anyway, but the principle is. So I've got my system which is taking any events that are more than 15 days old, and it's archiving those into the backup repositories. It's being done every day. So in my case, I've got it done just before 9 o'clock in the mornings. Often enough clients will have this happening overnight during a quiet period, and those records will be moved off and they're being moved into databases. Now, you saw those databases, the way the databases are named in the reporting when we were picking them up. You see basically it's going to have the archive, the instance name, and the time period. And in my case, I've got them being generated every quarter. So at the end of each quarter, a new database will be opened, created, and the records will then start to be written to that new database. What this allows you to do, by the way, is then archive that previous database into long-term storage. So if you are subject to regulatory requirements to hold the data for many years, then actually just taking those databases, putting them into your normal long-term data storage is the way to work with it. And you can see here, the database includes the time period where we're looking at, so that was the Q4 2015 type database we saw previously. Okay, so I think that largely covers off the areas of Compliance Manager. We talked about the fact that the databases are written in an immutable and unchangeable format. We've seen the archiving process we've gone through here. We've seen the reporting side, and also you've seen how easy it is to actually configure both at a macro level and a micro level what we actually collect and how we alert off it. So I think that covers most of the things that are necessary on that side. Bob?
Yeah, and as we've said, it's all about finding out from people how they're doing it now, how much hassle it is to do it now, and showing them how beneficial Compliance Manager could be for the auditing side of things. What we're going to do, if there's no questions, and there hasn't any popped up in my chat window so far, is move on to secure. And obviously, if you just want to leave all the questions to the end, we can go through them one by one once we've covered secure. Secure is quite easy. If you look at Compliance Manager, meaning the what, when, where, and how within the databases, secure tells you who did it. So it's all well and good having all of the auditing trail from Compliance Manager that's told you what's happened with your data, when it's happened, where it's happened, how it's happened. And then obviously you do get, it was this logon that did it within Compliance Manager. But then you go on to somebody, one of the auditors saying, well, who is that logon? Who is that person? Why have they got access to this? And you go, not actually sure, because there's quite a few people that can use that logon.
Okay, just
if they haven't got,
sorry, Bob.
sorry, I was going to say, if they haven't got an actual proper record of who has the sort of access to their data, what their permissions are within the system, it's going to cause them problems as well. Secure will tell you who on everything that goes on in the system based on the permissions that they have. And I'll let Stephen jump in again and cover the more in-depth side of that.
Yeah, sure. Just to say, there was one question sent through on secure, on some compliance that was sent through to me, and that was to do with versions and things. We're not using SQL auditing to collect this information, so we work with standard and enterprise and data center versions. We don't require specific versions to be able to monitor it, so hopefully that will address that question. Okay, so the point that Bob was talking about with this SQL Secure, which is really a case of talking about how people got permissions, what permissions they have got, and that they may or may not have used yet, but they have the access, the possibilities to use. So this is secure looking forward on permission side. So the type of things we're talking about there, we're talking about being able to set up policies, taking existing policies like PCI and things, but also create your own policies, analyze the data that you collect using SQL Secure and see how it maps into those policies, and then allows you to go through the process of validating the policy itself, going through a hardening process, rechecking it, and eventually going to publishing those within your organization. Can show you which vulnerabilities are there. You can explore it and wander around, look through the data, see who's got access to various things in both from a person role downwards and also from an object role upwards, and we'll see those through. And you can see so as we're going through there. One of the key things that we find people use SQL Secure for is the section at the bottom. Basically what we're talking about there is that SQL Secure can reach out, collect all the security information from your systems. You can go through a complete hardening process where you go through, check all the accesses that people got, make sure you're happy with them, and then you can create what might be thought of as a gold standard snapshot. This is how things should be. And then in a month's time, you can just collect another snapshot and just do a comparison between the two. And it'll quickly throw up any changes that have happened since you did the gold standard. That produces normally a much reduced set of data to work through, so you make sure you're happy with and to validate that those changes of permissions are ones you wanted to have. Then if you're happy with that, you can then make the new snapshot the gold standard to be compared with going forwards. So it makes it very easy to keep your system in a secure fashion. Okay, so let's go look at the product for real. This again is Compliance Manager, and here we're now looking at the secure product. So as I said, there's the two sides to it, where looking at from the top level, the policies, we can be seeing a range of policies we've got going through here. We can see that this, for example, might be the CIS policy. We can see that there was a draft assessment done. For example, these were the things that were found, the security checks that we were doing. So we did 45 checks on the data set. We can see what risks were found and the levels of the risks, but we also see down here this sort of information is all available in the reports to work from. You can then go through a hardening process. You can publish it outwards, and if you do, you then end up with a published assessments, which is the same sort of principle, but then you've actually gone through, you're displaying it to a wider audience for their feedback, and eventually you can go through to a full approved one where you actually lock the underlying data snapshot and the report together, so that you can actually refer back to them historically. Very easy, by the way, to create a policy in the first place. It's literally just a case of click on the button. If you want to, you can base it completely on first principles, or you can take an existing policy and then use that to go forward. So for example, you can see we've got some Idera based ones, some CIS ones, to 27,001 PCI and that sort of stuff. But these are often just starting points for what you want to take. But if you take something like the PCI one for starters, so we'll just give it a name. Boilerplate, standard sort of text that we normally apply to a PCI document, but then we're actually talking here about the range of checks that we might be talking about. So we can see here all the possible checks. I've got some access checks and some auditing, some configuration checks, and these are the ones that are pre-ticked on the left side are the ones that are normally considered to be applicable to PCI. But if I'm just using PCI as my base for developing my own policy, well, I might say actually I want to have that one as well, or I don't require the DAC remote access or whatever. If you are taking one of the ones that is standardly supplied, you'll get a description on the right hand side, but also a link to the external element of the regulation which we pulled this from. But if you're creating your own, of course, you might put a link here to your own internal regulatory section, subsection, and things that it's appropriate to. Stepping forwards, then you might say which particular service does this apply to. It could be all of them, or it could be that this particular one, if you're looking at CIS 2008, it doesn't really apply to 2004, or 2005 rather, so you probably don't want to apply it to that one. So you just tick that. But you can also list the particular servers that you're interested in and literally just step through, give it a name, free text, etc. and so forth. So very easy to create the policies, and then you can go through the assessments and things beyond it. As I mentioned, the other way, of course, to look at the data is in an exploring sort of situation. So I'll go through and explore the situations here. I've got all my instances I've chosen to collect, and we can see the various time intervals in the past where I've actually done a collection of data. This, of course, can be automated, but you can also run these things manually. And you can see down here the history of those particular audits, the level of information, the comments and things we've found. And again, click on that, and we're then starting to look at that particular snapshot of data at a particular point in time, and seeing the data that comes out of it. You can see when we collected the data, the sort of information. It took about just over 5 minutes, 5.5 minutes to be collected, the type of range or objects that were being found, and some high-level information below that. Things like the number of Windows accounts were found, suspect accounts where there's a what appears to be a Windows account in SQL Server but doesn't actually have a mirrored one out in the Active Directory we're connecting to, etc. We can then start to explore the data inward. So user and role are both starting off from the concept of obviously a user and a role, and then flowing downward to see what access to objects they have, whereas object permission is going the other way around. So we can pick up a particular user, either a Windows user or a Windows group, or a particular SQL logon. Now, I tend to use SQL logon because I've got my daughter Katya, which we can pick on again, and then we can say what sort of thing do we want to pick up? Just the server level things, or do we actually want to pick up on particular databases? So if we look at as well, we pick up on the Northwind database again, and we say let's have a look at the permissions that she's got. So we're starting off here with assigned permissions. So these are ones that have been explicitly given to her within the space, and we can see all the various parts down here. Where it starts to get interesting is where you use the effective permissions. So what this is actually doing then is seeing the permissions that Katya has that have been granted indirectly to her, so via maybe some roles she's been given, or maybe some inherited groups and things she's a member of. And this is where you start to find the extensions and pieces of information that you wouldn't otherwise know that you had access to. And again, you can explore that through. Similarly for roles. But where it really starts to get interesting is where you look at it from the other way around. And the number of times I've had clients do this on a trial, for example, and they go into their system, and yeah, you can kind of navigate through here. You can look at all the various security sides, and it's kind of gives you 1 point. But actually, if you come through to your databases, go through to the objects, and perhaps look at your tables, for example. Now, these are just your normal tables. You've got, hey, here's one of our crown jewel tables, the salary information table. Okay, who's got permissions to the salary information table? Okay, high level, that's not too bad. Look there, we can see that we've got a couple of user groups here. They've got select and update. That's good. We now know what sort of permissions we've got on the table. That's secure. That's no problem. Okay, let's just include the fixed roles and the inherited permissions. Who gets permissions? Actually, there's a lot more people here who got permission than we thought. So, of course, the DBO has it. Well, that's to be expected. They're the owner of the system. But okay, well, we've got user James, well, he's got select on it, and he got it because he was granted the select permission. But hey, look, here's Katya. No, Katya didn't visibly have access to this object, but we can see here that Katya has permissions, and she's got it because she's been given the control permission by the DB owner. And similarly down here, we can see some other ones beneath it. So this is really very useful to be able to go to your sensitive objects and find out, who's got access? And it's not infrequently that the client will run this thing. They'll go to the sensitive objects and they'll find, hang on, that's the contractor who was with us 6 months ago. And there's two errors that have happened there. The first one is that account hasn't been disabled, or may not have been disabled to delete it, but actually he was granted access to a role because it gave him access to the certain tables he needed at the time. But over time that role's been expanded and has now got access to this crown jewel table. And suddenly that role, that permission, that user, it's all replicated through, and suddenly he's got access to something you were not even aware he did. Sounds kind of fanciful. It's surprising how often it actually happens. Okay, so that's kind of looking at high level on the repository side, exploring and the report on the policies, and then of course there's reports where you can run the reports against it, look at particular vulnerabilities, look at tests and things. You can see them across it, entitlements, who's got permissions to what and things. I'm not going to go through them all, but I touched on the comparison report before. This is where you can actually take two snapshots, your gold standard, your next one, and say compare the two, quickly flush out the changes that have happened between the two. Make sure you can go through them, make sure you're happy with those, and if you are happy, make the new snapshot the new gold standard, or go through a hardening process, but then take a new snapshot, manual process, so click the button, let it go collect it, and then say, okay, I'm now happy with this, this is now my gold standard. So you can very easily do it, and that's what we're talking about there. So you can see now we've got the two sides to the security suite. There's the who did what, where, when, and how. Well, I guess the how comes from the SQL Secure, how the permissions were allocated, how they got them, whether they got them directly or indirectly on the permission side. So basically handling the full gamut of needs. Okay, Bob, you there?
I am, as ever.
Cool.
I'm never anywhere else. I'm just here in this office constantly. Mainly to keep away from my family, but there we go. Yeah, so what we've covered is what we call the security suite. So when you look at your price books, there is pricing for each individual product, i.e. Compliance Manager and Secure. The SQL suite is a reduced cost sort of bundle for the two in regards to selling as a whole sort of end-to-end security for their SQL environment. Also, there is something that I do a lot from the sales side at this end, is sort of sell Compliance Manager as higher value as I can, because of what it offers companies and the cost implications for them not being compliant with the things that they need to be compliant. And as a sweetener, kind of say, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you Secure at a massive discount rate. What you will tend to see is that you'll then end up selling it for slightly more than the security suite rate. But again, this is based on people not going onto the website and seeing the prices that are there. It's how you deal with your customers, because I'm not going to sort of tell you how to deal with the people in your region, because you know how to do that far better than I do. But the whole point around the questioning that we've talked about throughout, and with the sort of demonstrations on the things that Stephen's done, is based on the role of the person you're talking to, i.e. DBA, how much hassle is it for him to get information when he's told that he needs to get it, the IT auditors in how they structure all of their data, the reporting, how they get it out of the system, how much time and effort it takes them to do that. Again, the DBAs fall into that one as well. And from the sort of board level implications in regard to the maintaining the IT risk strategy, ensuring that the sort of threat policy is going through the entire company, especially in regards to customer data, these sort of things, because of the impact it can have on the brand of the organization. So that's pretty much covered off everything. So any questions from you guys? And we're at the point where we're not going to be jumping back into demos now, so if you want to unmute yourself and actually talk rather than just typing into the chat box, go ahead. So any questions? And don't forget, we have recorded the session for everybody, so we will be passing that out to you as well. So I take it then that that nobody has any questions then? Oh, here we go. Somebody's just popped on. Oh, I think that was actually Waleed just joining us. And you've just joined us right at the end of the session, Waleed. If there are no questions, yeah, go on.
That's all right. Thank you. I've been looking up the compliance manager myself, and no questions so far. So let's see.
And don't worry, because as I've said to everybody, Waleed, I will fire over the recording of the session as soon as we've got that sorted. But nobody's jumped on and said that they've got any questions. So if you think of anything afterwards, don't forget, Stephen and I are here at the other end of the phone all the time, or the other end of an email. If you require demos of the product, let me know. I can arrange that. Again, Stephen and I are here to support you guys in getting sort of customers on board looking at these products, and it's always one that I love talking about, and I know Stephen enjoys it as well, because when you're actually doing the demos, you would be amazed at how many companies that you're talking to, when you're actually showing the product and what it does, go, oh my God, we need to do that. We don't do that. Right. It tends to be a real eye-opener for people in regards to their internal auditing requirements, and when they start running permission sort of snapshots and things like that, we're secure on their network, they're, oh my God, there's things that need to be changed here. So again, as I said, any further questions, let me know. We will send over the recording as soon as we've checked it and confirmed that it's all working again. And thanks very much for attending, everybody. And I will probably be speaking to all of you over the next week or so anyway. So thanks very much, Stephen, for the demo side of things.
You're welcome. Thank you very much indeed for attending, everybody. Bye.